Hello everyone and welcome back to another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Sorry about that little mix-up. I'm Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. Happy Thursday. Hope you guys have enjoyed your day thus far and are just tuning in for another great edition of the show. We're going to do a more general betting preview today, looking at some popular prop bets for Sunday's slate of games. We looked at Thursday Night Football. Enjoy that game tonight. And also, we're going to transition a little bit to the world of college football yet again as we get into a pretty exciting Week 5 with a lot of big contests there. I'm also, in between, going to be talking about my shadow report, the wide receiver cornerback matchups that will define fantasy football this weekend, and also conclude my personal positional rankings based off of the matchups with my defenses and special teams units. And lastly, I will conclude my show with a little bit of an injury update and certain fantasy implications surrounding certain injuries around the league. But before we get into any of that, I do want to remind you to consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show and the network as a whole. It is greatly appreciated in whatever capacity you choose to contribute. One way in which you can do that while you are watching the show is through the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features, and also considering leaving tips and donations as well. They're a great way to contribute to the show, interact with the show. One of my favorite parts of the show because I want to get everyone's opinions on the show, not just mine. So if you do feel so inclined and you have anything you want to mention in the chat, feel free to leave it there and I will address it as soon as I possibly can throughout the show. But without further ado, let's jump right into our first segment of the day, talking about some popular prop bets around the NFL for Sunday's slate of games. A lot of interesting storylines here. We're getting into the thick of it, really. A lot of divisional games are going to pop up. And let's start off with a game and a player that should be a very intriguing storyline and bet to follow, because the narrative of this game can shift in so many different ways, but it's still an integral game to kind of start the divisional conversation in the NFC. It's Vikings-Packers. It's concerning Jordan Love. And I think that this particular prop bet may not even be applicable to this game, and here's why. I like the under for Jordan Love, whether or not he plays, which is the big part of this whole bet, because there still is doubt whether or not he is going to play in this game. He was a limited participant in practices both yesterday and today. He says he feels much better, but it's still up in the air whether or not he does play this game, which is kind of shocking because this was kind of the benchmark to see where he was and whether or not he will be able to play, because this is now a very important divisional game, because if Minnesota wins this game, then they have pretty firm control over the top of the division immediately. So even though, it's still up in the air, if he does play, I do kind of like the under here, because minus 110, you don't know what Jordan Love is going to look like. You don't know what the game script is going to be. And also, Brian Flores' defense has been impressive, and we have to give them their flowers in terms of determining how this game will play out, because you can't just look at the Packers offense and say, oh, well, if Jordan Love steps back into it, it will immediately become this offensive juggernaut again. Because remember, in that first game that they played in Brazil, yes, it was a very different environment. They were very big play reliant, and they didn't necessarily have a true rhythm to them. So even if Jordan Love is healthy for this game, even if he has the occasional big play in this game, I feel like the Vikings defense is more than well equipped to kind of limit the control they have of the football. And I think that that's going to hinder what Jordan Love's going to do in this game should he play. But this could come back to bite me, because at the end of the day, we still don't know whether or not he's going to play. I know it's crazy to say, but for now, this prop bet, once you hear news of whether or not he is going to play, should become very popular, because I have more faith right now in what the Vikings defense can do, what the Packers offense can do with potentially a very gimpy Jordan Love in that offense. And let's go over to someone who I've been wanting to mentioned positively from a betting perspective or even a fantasy perspective for so long, but just hasn't lived up to the hype. DeAndre Swift. This week kind of feels like the week where he could get right, however, facing a Rams defense that's really kind of topsy-turvy. I don't know how to define this Rams defense. They apply a good amount of pressure, have one of the higher pressure rates in the league, but it really doesn't amount to much. And this feels like a game where it's going to be dictated on game control. Whether or not either Los Angeles or Chicago is going to control the ball. And I feel like in this game, while they've seen a lot of good things out of Caleb Williams from that last game, they kind of want to protect him a little bit, I feel like. They have to protect him, so to speak. And considering the fact that they still don't have Keenan Allen out there, even though he found a good connection with Rome Odunze, you got to get the run game going somehow if you want to have any chance for Caleb to not have that game be an aberration. So DeAndre Swift kind of forcibly has to hit the over here. And it is an even betting line here at 43.5 rush yards. We're not asking a lot of him, but it's kind of a rhythm kind of thing because this Rams team still can find a way to win this game. They found a way to beat San Fran, albeit a very depleted San Fran team. But now, I got to feel like the Bears have to feel like they can take an advantage here. They seemingly have the advantage on both sides of the ball, potentially, and they have to recognize that in order for that success to carry over to the future, the short-term future that is, then they have to establish the run game. And DeAndre Swift's going to have to be a big part of it, and I believe in him still. I still believe in him as the guy who was one of the better running backs in the league as a Lion, as an Eagle, and now in Chicago, he just has to get going in order for this offense to really be a unit that I rely upon in the future. So DeAndre Swift could be a popular bet. And let's go to Nico Collins, kind of a guy who we expected to be still the wide receiver one in Houston, but for the past couple of weeks, whether because the offense itself hasn't clicked or because C.J. Stroud has had trouble distributing the football to his many receivers, Nico Collins really hasn't gotten going. But in this game, it should be an easy job for him to get open because he's playing one of the worst defenses in the league in Jacksonville. And the thing about Nico Collins is that I feel like it's more dependent on whether or not C.J. Stroud is comfortable in the pocket than it is about Nico Collins getting open. Because this unit will most likely play its best against divisional opponents, but also I feel like that game in Minnesota against that Brian Flores coach defense is not indicative of what I feel like defenses will try and do week in, week out against the Texans. I feel like that game plan was more predicated on stopping what Stroud can do and kind of frustrating him rather than the receivers. Very few people at the end of the day can, disguise pressures like Brian Flores can in terms of, sending pressure on certain downs, disguising it on certain downs. And I don't think the Jacksonville Jaguars are the team that can be good at doing that. So I think Nico Collins will have a very nice day at minus 115. And look for him to get back into the swing of things, Through the first couple of weeks, he has kind of been frustrated. But he's played some pretty good defenses. And I don't expect defenses to keep up with this Texans wide receiver room for much longer. They still are one of the better teams with one of the better wide receiver rooms in the league, and Nico Collins is indicative of that. So that was more of a CJ Stroud-centric game plan for a defense that they're going to see all year. So Nico Collins, I feel confident in hitting that over. And then Justin Jefferson as well. We were kind of worried about him. Like, will he miss a certain amount of time with that leg contusion? But no, he came back very healthy, looked very awesome in that game against the Texans. Again, not putting up the most spectacular of numbers, but still contributing to that offense. But in this game, I feel like he's going to hit the over, 79.5 yards, minus 110. Kind of feels like a game where he is going to be hungry to show up and show out. And the Vikings will probably, as a result, be hungry to show up and show out. Because here's the thing. Justin Jefferson, for what it's worth, as Andre says, ever since you called Andre Yoshevas getting 40 yards this week, I'm never down another bet. How did you know? Hey, man, I feel like I kind of see what teams look like at certain points of the season, whether it be injury crises or the rhythm of how they're playing, the tempo of how they're playing, and I just go from there. I also try and look at different prop bets from different websites and see how it kind of plays out with my personal predictions of how a guy is playing. But at the end of the day, it's really kind of down to, whether or not I actually believe in these. And when I look at all of the ones I have for this week, they can either hit or they can kind of be a swing and a miss here, because at the end of the day, the DeAndre Swift one is kind of asking a lot from what I've seen of the Bears' rushing attack. But I still believe in it because I think that they're going to have to at some point expand that attack. And the other ones I just feel like are second nature a little bit because they are the stars of their team. And at any given moment against any given team, they feel inevitable almost. So I'm not taking that much credit for coming up with these bets, but they are, at the end of the day, my personal and informed decisions on who I think will shine. But Justin Jefferson, I think, will have a nice, good week, because here's the thing. He has been injured for these kind of divisional games against Green Bay, as well as his cornerback we're going to talk about a little bit in the next segment, Jair Alexander. This is kind of the first time that he's really going into this game fully healthy and fully prepared. And this might be a trap game for Minnesota, but I just feel like Justin Jefferson will overcome that. And as Andre is asking about tonight's game as well, do you think tonight's game is going to be a competitive one? I can see the games going so many ways. I absolutely agree with you. I don't necessarily think it's going to be competitive in terms of how the game will play out, because I think that the Dallas Cowboys could dominate, but I don't think it will show up stat-wise, if you get what I'm saying. I think the Dallas Cowboys will have more control over the game, but it's not going to show up in the stat sheet, because I feel like the Giants' defense, for what it's worth, is very opportunistic in what it does, but it's also a defense that can generate pressure from the interior, from the edge, in many different ways. And I think that if Dallas sticks with a game script of just Dak and CD, then that could be very troublesome for them. But there can be some moments where, Dallas wants to wear out this New York defense. So I feel like it can be quote-unquote competitive in terms of the score line, but not necessarily the stat sheet, if you get what I'm saying. But at the end of the day, I agree with you in terms of how the game flow can go either way, because I really don't have much faith. As Andre also says, I think the Giants' D-line is going to get to Dak a lot tonight. I think that's honestly a pretty solid opinion to have of this Giants D-line, because I think Dak is starting to become a little too overconfident in McCarthy's game plans week in, week out. So I'm not certain that it's going to work in a divisional game that certainly feels like it should be a dominant Cowboys win. But the Giants certainly have a little bit of momentum coming into it, so it could go either way. If Dak can't stay on schedule and the offense collapses around him, then this could be a bloodbath going the Giants' way, if you want my opinion. But it is going to be a very weird game to follow. But thank you for your comments. Hope you guys enjoyed Thursday Night Football. We do have to take a quick break. I'm sorry I didn't get to the last bet that I wanted to get to, but we do have to take a quick break. And coming up next, I go over my weekly shadow report and the wide receiver cornerback matchups that I think will define fantasy football this week. We'll be right back to talk about that right after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of today's show, I do want to remind you yet again, consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show on the network. Also, if you do feel so inclined, and you guys have been doing a great job so far of it, contribute to the show through the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features. It's a great way if you want to get any comments, questions, concerns out there and addressed on the show, to kind of have this become more interactive. But you guys have been doing a great job. I can't thank you enough for all the comments you leave. And speaking of comments, we come back from the break with a comment from Andre again. Marv and CD are my top two that have the best matchups. They certainly have the most intriguing matchups because both are facing very young, raw cornerbacks. I believe the top cornerback for the Commanders right now is Emmanuel Forbes. I know they have a lot of injuries in that secondary right now, but I do believe that it will be Emmanuel Forbes that we see Marv matched up with. It could be Benjamin St. Just, but I'm not certain because of how I feel like the Cardinals could line up Marvin Harrison Jr. this week. But that could be an intriguing matchup because Marv could get a lot of early looks. The Commanders secondary is certainly not one of the best in the league, and he could have another dominant performance like we saw against LA. In CD's case, he's going up against another young, raw corner in, I believe, Deontay Banks. And that could be a fun matchup as well. It's the first kind of divisional rivalry matchup that we get in this kind of slate of games for this week. And so it could be a nice one that could determine the game. As Andre also says, do you think Neighbors has a good game tonight? I'm a little worried. I would say that Malik Neighbors can have a good game, but be wary. I feel like you need to be wary of when he has the big games, right? Because in divisional games, it could become more important for him to establish himself as a stud. But in games where you kind of don't necessarily want to place that much importance on, you kind of want to explore your avenues with this offense, right? Because it's nice that Daniel Jones, like I said a little bit yesterday, has a weapon in Malik Neighbors that he can rely upon. But this offense definitely needs to become more varied because it can't just be the Jones and Neighbors show, because that could spell trouble for Daniel Jones' development and maturation, most importantly in this offense. But thank you for your comments yet again. Hopefully we see a nice game from both of those receivers tonight in CD and Malik Neighbors. But I do want to get to, as Andre also says, do you think Neighbors' yards or receptions prop is safer tonight? I would say his yardage prop is safer tonight because I feel like when you think about the target share in New York, yes, he's obviously going to get the lion's share of them, but I kind of feel like his yardage production is going to increase in divisional games as well. So look for him to get a fair amount of targets still, but look for his numbers to skyrocket, especially in divisional games. If I'm watching the Giants playing either the Cowboys, Eagles, or Commanders, I'm kind of saying that I think Malik Neighbors' yardage numbers will go up. But thank you yet again for your comments, if that helps you, Andre, for tonight's game in terms of your fantasy roster, in terms of betting perspective as well. But I do want to get to my own kind of shadow report because we do have some other interesting matchups as well. And we start off with a very intriguing divisional one as well, kind of one that could define the NFC South right now. And it's a weird one because this guy isn't necessarily the wide receiver one for New Orleans, but he can determine the outcome of this game in a very, very meaningful way. And that is Rashid Shaheed going up against either AJ Terrell or Mike Hughes. And I feel like the reason why this matchup is much bigger than whoever Chris Olave is matched up against is because Rashid Shaheed is kind of the skeleton key for this offense, if you will. He can unlock anything. And as Andre also says, and did you see CMC set to miss another couple months, apparently? His fantasy owners are cooked. Well, that's the way the cookie crumbles sometimes, man. We're going to talk a little bit more about injury updates as well, especially with the teams that have been most impacted by them in terms of fantasy implications. But CMC, man, if you are a fantasy owner of CMC, you kind of have to be miffed about it. But in that sense, you also are at the advantage of streaming nice fantasy running backs through either the waiver wire or by picking them up week by week. And running backs are starting to become a little bit more of a matchup-oriented position, if you want my opinion. And it's going to become very important if you were a CMC manager to diagnose your favorite matchups by week and then kind of go from there. Because if you also are someone who played a little bit of hero running back, you might not have the same depth of other people who had the advantage of waiting a little bit longer to take their guy at running back. So if you are in that position, looking at different matchups that you like for different running backs who other people might not have considered is very advantageous for you at this point. That's all I can really say. But you kind of are in a weird position if you are a CMC owner. So thank you for that comment and that observation, Andre. As Andre also mentions, with me being a Mason owner, does that news skyrocket his value? I certainly believe that is the case. But the 49ers are a weird team right now in terms of fantasy stock, because I can sit here and say Jordan Mason is going to get, say, 100 yards per game, 15 to 20 touches, and he's going to be someone week in, week out that can perform for you. But I can also say that either Jawan Jennings or Brandon Ayuk is going to get a lot of touches in this offense, and as a result, elevate Brock Purdy's status, if you know what I mean. So it is a very fickle offense right now. But Jordan Mason is someone that I think a lot of fantasy owners will want to hold on to had they known about him earlier, because in the future, if CMC comes back and he's healthy and it's the fantasy playoffs, you can use Mason as leverage to get rid of him. And if someone wasn't diligent in, say, taking care of Christian McCaffrey in terms of not releasing him, then you can use him as trade bait and say, hey, either you can give me McCaffrey while he's still, injured. This is just me kind of spitballing here. But releasing Jordan Mason after a certain amount of time and after McCaffrey comes back certainly will make sense. But he's someone who can be leveraged in certain situations as well. So that definitely skyrockets his value. But I do want to get to this particular matchup in the NFC South, because Rashid Shaheed, like I said, he is a very kind of volatile receiver in that he can unlock a defense, or he's someone who can contribute negatively to the Saints' overall outlook. In this past week, it was the latter, but this week, going up against the Falcons and the Saints wanting to win this game to really prove they're the cream of the crop in the division is going to be very important, because not only are you in a position where you can still prove yourselves as someone who can contend in the NFC, but you're an offense that can do it in many variable ways. And Rashid Shaheed, no matter who he's going up against, is always someone you have to watch out for as a corner. And whether it's A.J. Terrell, who I think will match up more with Chris Olave, or Mike Hughes, that I think that Derek Carr is going to have to take advantage of either one of them wherever Rashid Shaheed is lined up. So this matchup is going to be very critical. Maybe not in as big as fantasy terms as I can think of right now, but it is still going to be a meaningful matchup. And then the next one I'm kind of interested in, kind of a more low-key one that I can't really tell you much about, but it's not necessarily going to be game-defining, but it's still a nice one because both of these guys are highly underrated at what they do. Rashee Rice versus Asante Samuel. I think that the reason why I like this matchup so much is that Asante Samuel is one of the more underrated players in the Chargers defense on the back end of things. And he is one of the better corners in terms of man coverage. And going up against a receiver, especially a wide receiver one like Rashee Rice, who is not necessarily going to be someone who is going to be a guy who travels through different areas of the field as often as possible. He's going to be someone that's going to interpret the field in a much different way than your typical wide receiver one. Because what I've seen with him so far, especially as a fantasy owner of him, is that he loves taking advantage of the middle of the field. He's going to make his bread and butter there. In some aspects of his game, he's going to want to go long, but at the end of the day, he's going to play it safe. And the reason why I like that in this matchup is because it's going to test Asante Samuel as a sideline-to-sideline corner as well. It's going to take him to kind of uncharted territory a little bit, going to take him out of his comfort zone. And if you know the Chargers defense sans Joey Bosa is not generating pressure up front, then look for Rashee Rice to kind of expand his route tree throughout this game as well. There's no telling what this guy's going to do, and that's why I really like this matchup. And then to kind of finish this off, these two are very interesting ones as well, kind of in the AFC and NFC, one being a divisional matchup, one just being a matchup that I'm kind of intrigued by because of the status of both of these guys, Garrett Wilson and Pat Surtain. Pat Surtain has always been one of the best corners in the league. Man, so bar none. He's faced DK, he's faced Pickens, and he's faced Mike Evans already this season. And he's matched up with them on 53 perimeter routes. So this one's going to be a question of alignment and also a question of whether or not Garrett Wilson and Aaron Rodgers can get on the same page. It seems like Aaron Rodgers is more comfortable throwing the ball to guys like Lazard or Conklin right now, and it doesn't seem like him and Garrett Wilson are on the same page on some routes. We saw it very often in the New England game. So this match can be highly predicated on whether or not Garrett Wilson can even get open, but also whether or not Garrett Wilson can get on the same page as Aaron Rodgers as well. I think Pat Surtain has a heavy advantage here, but as a fantasy owner of Garrett Wilson, the kind of caveat here is that if, it's not working out and he's locking him up, then it could also open up many different horizons for other options for Aaron Rodgers. So this one is kind of like a chess match where if you can't focus on what you're good at, you have to open up other avenues for certain pieces to work, if you get what I'm saying here. So this matchup is more of a tactical one than one what can be defined by stats. And then the last one I kind of want to go over before we go to a quick break is, of course, Justin Jefferson versus Jair Alexander. A marquee matchup that we haven't often seen in the NFL that much because both these guys have been off the field for these games in whatever capacity. But Justin Jefferson, in the game that he has played, has been very up and down. And as Jair Alexander is someone who is going to test him in a way that no other defense has tested Justin Jefferson so far. The Packers secondary has been one of the best in the league, forcing some of the most takeaways we've seen. He shut out A.J. Brown and Calvin Ridley so far, and he's done an excellent job of that, and an excellent job of kind of being the captain of that secondary. So this matchup is going to be fun to watch, but it's also all about, Sam Darnold continuing to be someone who can play mistake-free football, because if Sam Darnold gets a little bit panicked, then Justin Jefferson isn't as big an X factor in this game as I might think. But at the end of the day, I think this one is fun because it's a divisional rivalry and an important early matchup that I feel can go either way. But let me know what you think in the comments. That will just about do it for this segment. Coming next, I get my final positional rankings of the week, my favorite defenses and special teams units that I think will shine in week 4 for you in fantasy. We'll be right back after this short break to talk about that.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our third segment, I do want to address a comment that we got from Andre yet again right before the break. As a Packers fan, we're bringing the Vikings back down to earth. Some good old humble pie if Love plays. Well, as much as I would love to see that, my dad is a Vikings fan, and as much as I love to see, my dad get angry after a Vikings game if they lose, this game certainly feels like the Vikings actually may have the upper hand here. And I say this with all candidness. I feel like the Vikings defense was kind of underestimated throughout the entire offseason, even coming into this year. So if Love plays, there's definitely kind of a rejuvenation in the play calling and the diversity of the play calling that Matt LaFleur has at disposal. But I still have to see if Love looks effective on the field. Because remember what I said about that game in Brazil against the Eagles. Yes, it was a very weird game where you kind of felt like both teams wanted to rely on the big play. But if you rely on the big play all the time, then rhythm, tempo, and most importantly, control of your offense kind of gets out of hand. So I feel like this game is going to be one where the better defense wins. And right now, it's kind of a muddy situation for the Packers offense, because if Love plays, I think he can diversify the playbook enough, but it's all about how he operates it, if that makes sense. But I'm wishing the Packers and Vikings, for that matter, good luck in this early divisional contest. But our third segment of the day is going to concern some of the top defenses for this week as well. And all four of these defenses are defenses that we kind of haven't given that much appreciation in the show just yet, but are starting to round into some of the defenses I would most trust in terms of week in, week out, matchup-oriented defenses, if you feel what I'm saying. And based off this week's matchup, there certainly are ones where you take more advantage playing these defenses than others, because in other games, the tension is kind of thick because of the divisional and conference implications. As Captain Learn says, Rodgers is so finicky, a bit of a diva when it comes to who gets targets. Wilson is the best wide receiver on that team, hands down, pun intended. I feel like you're right in that regard, but from what I've seen from Rodgers, he is kind of a yes man when it comes to wanting to get the ball into the hands of his kind of guys. And we saw in that game Thursday night against New England where he kind of fed guys who fit the kind of profile. Wilson right now is still the best wide receiver on that team, bar none. But it's all about, what Aaron Rodgers has been wanting. And what Aaron Rodgers has been wanting is getting his guys involved. And it could eventually lead to the detriment of this team, but I still have hope for Garrett Wilson, especially as a fantasy owner of him. But thank you for both of your comments, but we do have to get into this segment. Let's start off with a defense who I think is quickly rounding into form, and is the Jets defense, by the way. They're going up against the Broncos team that, yes, had a pretty impressive performance offensively against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but I'm still not a Bo Nix fan. I'm not sold on that performance because, albeit it was an impressive one, but it was against a very banged-up Bucs team. Now, the Jets defense through the first couple of weeks have been kind of horrific in terms of run defense and absolutely as well in terms of pass defense. But you have to understand that this team is kind of more concerned about developing on both sides of the ball in a way that can sustain what the change that Aaron Rodgers brings to the overall success of this team means to it, if that makes sense. Because it's not necessarily, a give and take kind of roster, because I know how good this Jets defense is and can be. But when, your offense isn't as set up as you expect to start the year, and Rodgers, like Tap Learn says, is kind of a finicky QB to have, it does kind of mess with the defense a little bit. And it kind of has a trickle-down effect to where sometimes you let games on the defensive end slip. But against the Broncos, I feel confident that they're going to maintain the good things that we saw from them against the Patriots because, again, Bo Nix just took advantage of a very weakened Bucs front and, for that matter, secondary as well. So the Jets, they got 7 sacks against Jacoby Brissett. Eventually, they're going to have to prove it against better teams. But for now, against these kind of quote-unquote cupcake teams, I think that they will find a lot of success and get back to what we know best from them. But then let's go to another defense that we do know and expect to be one that will be perhaps the best unit in the league when all is said and done. The Pittsburgh Steelers. They're going up against the Indianapolis Colts defense offense that is very hit or miss. I think that Anthony Richardson has all the potential in the world. He makes some of the biggest, best throws that we've ever seen in the league, but he is, yet again, raw. He's not someone who can put the whole thing together just yet. It's going to come down to how Shane Steichen coaches him up to kind of make the more effective plays rather than try and go for the big play every once in a while. Also, his dual threat ability still has to come into play here in terms of finding the best way to minimize, injury risk as well as maximize that kind of potential in his game. So overall, I feel like the Steelers defense will be comfortable. Yes, Alex Highsmith is going to be out for this game, and he's a huge part of that linebacking core, the connectiveness that they have. But I still think they're going to have a nice day. They had a great day, 5 sacks against. Now I'm blanking on who the Steelers played this past weekend. Let me know in the comments. But they did have a fantastic game in that game this past weekend. So I'm kind of expecting it to carry over as well. And the Steelers defense, at the end of the day, no matter what the offense looks like, whether, it's going to be a very kind of complementary style of football that they play on the offensive side, or whether or not, Justin Fields can actually be as effective as he has been for the first couple of weeks, I still think at the end of the day, the Steelers will get mentioned a lot in this ranking of mine because of the players they have and because of what they bring to the table. So look for them in this matchup to really show up and show out. But the next defense is kind of an underrated one. And this is one that I kind of saw in the matchup, albeit before I watched the Rams come back against the 49ers. But the Bears defense, if we forget about the offensive side of the football entirely and just look at the defensive side of the football through the first 3 weeks, you have to say the Bears have been one of the more impressive defenses in the league so far, especially in their secondary. The run defense is a little bit iffy, and Kyron Williams, kind of had a big game against San Fran. But, if Matthew Stafford wants to kind of incorporate these guys in the wide receiver room that you don't get as many touches when Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are in there, then that could be kind of a conundrum for him because the Bears' defense is feisty, it's hungry, and its secondary is its best strength. So if Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay try and throw the ball, be wary of the corners and safeties that the Bears have. I love Jalen Johnson. I love Tyreek Stevenson. I love Kyler Gordon. All guys who can have a positive impact on turning the ball over in this game. They were very integral in keeping that game close against Indy. And, this is kind of a different test because Matthew Stafford can take better care of the football than Anthony Richardson. But at the end of the day, the Bears defense has really impressed me overall through 3 weeks. And it's safe to say that the offensive side of the football will kind of find itself in troublesome situations as, Caleb is trying to understand the intricacies and balances of what this offense can be. But at the end of the day, the Bears defense is good enough to keep it in any game. They did it against the Titans. They did it against the Colts, even though the offense really didn't step up until the fourth quarter. So I'm looking for them to really kind of test this depleted Rams roster, especially, with the offensive line in shambles. Maybe that part of their defense gets going as well. So look for the Bears to be a sneaky, interesting defense in fantasy this week. And the last one I want to talk about, another divisional contest, the Saints defense. If it weren't for, a couple of big plays in that game that didn't go their way on the defensive end, the Saints win this game. And you got to give it up to them for what they were able to do against an Eagles team that can be a very versatile offense and very tough to defend at that. So just coming in, limiting what they can do, doing their part, even though their offense kind of did not rise to the occasion in this game. Going up against the Falcons this week, I kind of feel like it could be a very similar game to what we saw in that Philly game, where it's going to be a very gritty contest, very low scoring, and I think it's going to come down to the defenses. And the Saints defense is timely. They still have players, even though they're getting up there in age, who can contribute, and I just really like the makeup of this defense in terms of how it stays on schedule, in terms of what it did against top-level quarterbacks in the NFC East, in Jalen Hurts and Dak Prescott. And in the division, I feel like this defense is one of the more underrated ones, because we're always talking about, the Falcons, signing Matthew Judon and Justin Simmons really revamped that defense, really gave it a different look. In the Bucs, when they're healthy, they have a very volatile defense, especially in that defensive front and in the secondary as well. And then, when I look at the Saints, they don't really have, one guy who can take over the game. That's what's special about them. They're timely and opportunistic, and you can never underestimate a unit like the New Orleans Saints, because they are one of the older teams in the NFL, let's face it. And in terms of how you have to take that into account, you have to kind of take the punches as they come, and they've been doing a fantastic job of it. They've been taking everyone's best punch and exceeding expectations, and I think that they're an underrated defense, not just in the NFC South, but in all of the NFL, because we kind of overlooked them because we thought this group was getting to the point where some of its players would age out. That has not been the case, and the Saints, against this Atlanta Falcons offense that has been improving, but I still don't think have reached its peak, will take effect this week. But let me know what you think in the comments. That will just about do it for our third segment of the day here on the show. Coming up next, we transition a little bit to the world of college football, where I go over some of the best bets for Week 5. A lot of good games. We'll be right back to talk about them after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. And we are going to take a little bit of a transitional time for this segment to look at the world of college football. Week 5 is quickly going to come upon us, and we have a lot of good games on the slate for this weekend, a lot of top 25 matchups to go through, as Tap to Learn comes up with a comment here before we get into this next segment. Alvin Kamara for Mason. I think that this week, I wouldn't be surprised if that was your play. I think that Alvin Kamara has a little bit of a more favorable matchup, because I like the Falcons secondary more than I like their front, which means that the Saints game plan can get back to involving Kamara even more. And Mason, I think we see with him that he, at the end of the day, is good for a couple of big games, but in that offensive system, even with some of the weapons out, he's still seen as someone who's just setting the tone, if you know what I mean. I still think Brandon Ayuk and Jawan Jennings will run the show when it's all said and done in that offense. And so, as long as Jordan Mason is timely, that's the best thing that the 49ers can ask of him. So Alvin Kamara is going to be more of part of the Saints' game plan, I feel, moving forward than Jordan Mason right now. So I wouldn't be surprised if Alvin Kamara has a better fantasy week than Jordan Mason. But back to the topic here of college football, because I do kind of want to get into it, because it's been a little bit of a respite from the world of college football here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. And I want to bring it back into the limelight because we have a lot of interesting games this week. A lot of early games in different conferences that could define how we view certain teams. And this one that I'm going to start off with in terms of a betting perspective is a weird one because we didn't expect one of these teams to be where they are right now. And the other team has shown kind of a revolution in their offensive philosophies under new offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki. Of course, I'm talking about Illinois Penn State. Who would have thought this game would be a game between two ranked teams in the Big Ten that could define how we view these teams going forward as a CFP contender? Even calling Illinois right now a CFP contender is weird, but that's where they stand. And what I love about them is that they've done it through a timely defense and through opportunistic complementary offense. Let's face it, Luke Altmaier is not the best of college quarterbacks. He's someone who I feel like at the end of the day is more likely to want to play mistake-free than try and get the big play and effectively run the offense. But at the end of the day, he's kept them on schedule, most importantly, and he's let the defense run the show. I love their secondary combined with their run defense, and they're going to cause a true litmus test for this Penn State team. But if Penn State has changed anything about their team, and in one aspect that I really like about it, it is their offense. They put up 41.3 points per game so far. Drew Aller has really stepped up his game, and Andy Kotelnicki has really made this offense a force to be reckoned with. Drew Aller, from what we saw from last year, where he played quote-unquote pretty well but wasn't throwing the ball far down the field enough, he's now ranked 16th in completion percentage, 5th in QBR, 2nd in yards per attempt. And combined with all these young receivers stepping up with guys like Omari Evans, Harrison Wallace III, they've really stepped up as well. And they still have two of the best running backs in the nation. Let's not forget about that aspect of it. Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. But going up against Illinois, I feel like this is a defense that has the potential to really frustrate this offense. It can limit explosive plays and can get to the quarterback and get Drew Aller frustrated because, let's face it, they haven't faced the toughest of competition. Penn State, yes, Drew Aller has done a fantastic job of staying upright and protecting the football, but Illinois across the board can do it. And if they play timely defense and Luke Altmaier protects the football, I feel like this game can be closer than people expect. And I think that in terms of what Illinois' game plan is coming into this game, it's going to be very reliant on trying to frustrate on both sides of the football Penn State's team. Because let's face it, a lot of people are worried about Penn State's defense as well. And while Illinois' offense isn't explosive enough to get those big touchdowns, it is one of those offenses where through complementary style of football, through protecting the football, they can get their money's worth. And so it's a weird game about Penn State, albeit are 17.5-point favorites. So they still are viewed as the overall superior team here. But I think, if anything, Illinois can cover that spread and maybe even comfortably. Because at the end of the day, Penn State is still a very fickle team. I want to see them up against the elite of the Big Ten. And so far, we don't know if Illinois is that, but we do know that Illinois is undefeated. As Andre said, the Thursday Night Football prop, the last segment. Actually, my man, we did the Thursday Night Football props yesterday. Go check out that segment if you haven't already, my man. Sorry to kind of disappoint you if you were expecting that. We are going to go over some important injuries in the NFL in terms of the fantasy implications for that final segment, but thank you for your concern about that because I did want to mention Thursday Night Football props as well. But going ahead to another big game, not necessarily a big conference game, but an interesting one as well, Louisville and Notre Dame. I think that this game is more intriguing because of the limited margin for error for both teams. If you're Louisville in a very competitive ACC, you want another high-profile win that's going to skyrocket you into contention as potentially an at-large bid, even though the ACC is not the most attractive conference for an at-large bid. And if you're Notre Dame, you just want to continue to stay in the conversation. That Northern Illinois loss is going to hurt you, but at the end of the day, if you continue getting nice wins against conference opponents as an independent school, then you're doing something right here. And I feel like this game is going to come down to Riley Leonard's play more than it is anything to do with Louisville, because Riley Leonard right now is relying a little bit too much on his legs, so I want to see him get more involved in the passing game. They have a lot of interesting weapons in the passing game. They have some of the best tight ends in the country. They have some interesting weapons in the wide receiver room as well. So it's going to be all about Riley Leonard in this game. Can he show he's not just predicated on trying to run the football effectively as their QB, rather than, passing and just focus on what is best for this team? So it's going to be an interesting game. Notre Dame is a 4.5-point favorite, and I like them to cover the spread, but I can see a world, as Andre asks, what's your most confident Giants player prop? I would say the under for Daniel Jones' passing yards is my most confident one, because I feel like, yes, he has Malik Neighbors now, but I still feel that he's not as confident distributing the ball, varying this offense that much right now. So I look for him to continue to struggle to put up nice passing yardage numbers. So that would be my most confident one, but I wouldn't say it's the most popular one. I would say Malik Neighbors is getting a lot of hype, so make of that what you will, but my most confident one is that Daniel Jones definitely doesn't feel like he's going to have the yardage totals tonight. It's just my opinion, and I hope that it really helps you in terms of figuring out how to bet on this game. In terms of another college game that I really like, Georgia-Bama. This is the big one of the week. And I think that this game could really not only define the SEC, but really define how bettors and odds makers going forward value these teams in the SEC as well. Because when I look at the landscape of the SEC right now, Texas is figuring to be a top dog. They're going to start SEC play. We still don't know necessarily about Missouri. We saw the impressive nature of Tennessee's win on the road against Oklahoma. So this game really doesn't feel like it's that important, but it's that important in terms of how people will bet on them going forward. UGA is only a 2.5-point favorite. The over-under is 49.5, the money line right now. Georgia minus 125, Alabama plus 105. So I can really see this game go either way, in that either Georgia can control the tempo of this game after that sloppy week against Kentucky and taking that bye week this week. They might just be the more prepared team, whereas Alabama might be too reliant on the big play. Or I can just say Alabama's explosiveness on the offensive side of the football completely overwhelms Georgia. And I feel like I'm more confident in the former because I know that Georgia is capable of that, and I know that extra week for Georgia is kind of a blessing because they also get back a lot of defensive depth as well. So I feel more confident in Georgia. But that being said, Alabama and their big play ability can keep them in this game. I'm not underestimating what Jalen Miller can do in the pass and run game outside of Alabama. So I feel like this game is going to be an interesting one to bet on just because of the fickleness of both of these teams and how they can come out in this game. But I feel like I'm more confident in saying Georgia are the worthy favorite than I am in saying Alabama will outright win this game against the spread. And the final game, another very interesting one that could really kind of seal the fate of Arizona right now in the Big 12 race and really kind of ascend Utah into not just Big 12 title contenders, but CFP contenders as well. Arizona-Utah is going to be an interesting one because a lot of people might look at this as being like the CFP clinching game for Utah, because I look at the schedule. Yes, they play surprise contenders in BYU and Iowa State in the Big 12 still, But Utah just feels like a team that if they win this game, it's going to be confidence going forward, no matter who's at the QB position. They're favored by 11.5 points, and whether or not it's Isaac Wilson or Cam Rising in the QB position, Utah just feels right now they're going to cement themselves very well in the race for the Big 12. But that was just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments about these top bets in college football. Going to be an interesting week, really. I think that Georgia-Alabama game, a lot of people are going to have fun with betting-wise and stat-wise as well. But coming up to conclude today's show, we are going to be taking a little look around the NFL in terms of injury updates and ensuing fantasy implications for these players and teams in that matter. So you don't want to miss this final segment. We'll be right back after the break to conclude our show with it. Welcome back, everyone, to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast and our final segment of the day here. And this one is going to be a little bit of a deep dive into all the injuries over the past couple of weeks, starting off with the more prescient ones that happened in Week 3, kind of circling back to the big ones that happened a couple weeks ago. I think that this kind of segment really does give you the bigger picture and tells you the story of how these teams will look going forward, and which, most importantly, fantasy players will become even more valued or less valued based off of how these injuries shake out. So without further ado, let's jump right into this segment. Starting off with, like I said, the more prescient ones, the ones that were sustained in Week 3, that will have immediate effect in Week 4, potentially beyond. Justin Herbert is one that I feel like is not as major as people think, but still one to monitor in terms of how this affects the whole team. He did re-aggravate that ankle injury in that game against, I believe it was the Panthers. I think that, this injury really isn't as bad for fantasy implications as you think, because as a whole, Justin Herbert's been the most effective fantasy quarterback at the moment as a passer. But when I look at all the other injuries around the team, that's where I start to worry. I worry about the offensive line. They just lost two of their best tackles, in Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater, for what could be an extended period of time. And, J.K. Dobbins did not perform very well in the last game. They're going up against a Chiefs defense that, yes, is still underrated, but at the end of the day will, try and take away your best part of your offense. And so while a lot of people might be wanting to see this game be a statement for Jim Harbaugh and his offensive philosophy, it might not be because of the depletedness of their O-line and their quarterback. And a lot of people might be saying that Justin Herbert can still play, but he's going to be gimpy, and it could affect the overall play of this offense if, he's sitting behind an offensive line down its top two tackles and having to hand the ball off to J.K. Dobbins as well, who a lot of people are expecting to put up big fantasy numbers as a result. So it's just going to be a weird storyline to follow. I expect Justin Herbert to sit out this game, and I hope the Chargers see that he has to sit out this game, even though, it's kind of a bittersweet one to sit out because it's against the Chiefs. So the Justin Herbert one isn't necessarily going to impact this team for a long period of time, but the other injuries are what concern me surrounding him that I feel like could make this injury worse than it potentially is right now. And then Devontae Smith is another one who I feel like is only going to be a 1 week thing. Another team that has a lot of injuries to worry about as well. I mean, for what it's worth, Lane Johnson, who also suffered a concussion in that game against New Orleans, did return to practice, but A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith did not practice, rather, in both the Wednesday and Thursday practices. So make of that what you will. I think that's kind of, as Austin Shoes entered the chat, says, what's up? What's up to you, my man? Welcome to the show. Start Steele or Dowdle. I mean, both of these guys, I don't necessarily think you should quote-unquote start rather than put them in as a flex option. But if you want my honest opinion about who I think will be better this week, I think it will be Carson Steele. I like, to think that Rico Dowdle could become someone in the Cowboys offense. But like I said, I don't know if the Cowboys offense is willing to look outside of Dak and CD right now. It just seems like everything is centered around them and their play, and it's to the detriment of everyone else in that offense. Whereas Steele really impressed me in the amount of touches he had this game and what he did with them as well. And he's going up against the Chargers front that is sans Joey Bosa, so I'm not sure, how that defensive front is going to impact this game. So look for Carson Steele to get some interesting yardage. That being said, I wouldn't necessarily start them as your RB1, but rather in a RB2 situation or as a flex option. That's just my opinion. But good luck to you in your decisions and your fantasy football exploits, Austin Shoes. Welcome to the show as well. Getting back to kind of more injury updates, the Devontae Smith one, I think this is just going to be a 1 week thing. But the nature of this team right now is one in which the offense has a lot of questions to fill. That being said, it could be a positive, as Austin Shoe says, yes, my flex option, my bad. Worried about Hunt taking carries. And Dallas has a decent matchup, so I was debating Dowdle. Thank you for the advice. I mean, both of these guys have interesting matchups. I just felt comfortable in Steele because, like I said, the Chiefs aren't necessarily going to use the run game that much, even though they could take advantage of a very depleted Chargers front, like I said. It's just that Dowdle, I wish that he were a bigger part of the Cowboys offense, but right now, I just don't feel like the Cowboys are seeing what he can be or what other running backs in this team can be. And it's really affecting how they run the football right now. And Carson Steele, is just someone, and you're right in saying that Hunt could get a lot of carries as he was signed this week by them. So it just feels like that running back room in Kansas City has more of a defined status than the one in Dallas. So week in, week out, it's going to be interesting to see how Dowdle can perform in this Cowboys offense if he's allowed to. But right now, I'm more confident in Steele being a solid flex option. But at the end of the day, looking at how injuries have affected teams, I'm not necessarily going to talk about the Isaiah Pacheco injury. I think because a lot of people already know the situation. It's settled. It's going to be a mixture of Samaje Perine, Carson Steele, and now Kareem Hunt for quite some time. But let's look into the Rams as well, because they are a team that are a prime example of next man up. I think that, Puka and Cooper Kupp are two guys that I feel like a lot of people expected to either kind of fight it out as the top wide receiver for the Rams, or, Puka was just going to supplant Kupp as the wide receiver one, but now, both of them are injured. So it's a matter of, finding perhaps the next Puka Nacua in this system. And it's just going to be a fun opportunity to learn more about the Los Angeles Rams as well, because I kind of feel like a lot of people were also thinking about Kyron Williams as a popular option for the Rams, and he did have a big day in that game against San Fran. But I'm really looking, if I'm a Rams enthusiast in terms of whether I'm a fan or just wanting to find guys who could be hidden gems for my team's sleeper picks, I'm more interested in, the receivers as well. Can Tutu Atwell be effective? Can Demarcus Robinson be more than just a solid route running red zone threat? Can Jordan Whittington step up? I love that guy out of Texas. Can Colby Parkinson put together more than just a few good games a year? So with the Rams and a team like the 49ers as well, it's all about kind of mining through and finding guys who you may not have heard of or may not have expected to perform as well in these situations, and really taking advantage of these injuries that are long-term. But then, going back to short-term injuries, another guy who a lot of people might be worried about, not just because of this injury, but because of his overall fantasy play throughout the season. How about Sam Laporta? His status is up in the air, kind of more of a day-to-day injury with that low ankle sprain. If it were a high ankle sprain, I would have worried about him a little bit more. But I think for a guy like Laporta, this injury isn't as, quote-unquote bad as I think it's going to be. It's just like the Lions' offense can be so varied in the style it plays, and they feel like they're confident right now running the football more with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. So we're just going to have to accept that a little bit. This is more of an acceptance injury more than an injury that you can take advantage of, because a lot of people were very hyped about Laporta, and I understand that hype that he's receiving, but it's just one of those where you have to kind of wait it out for his big moment again. And then for what it's worth, I don't know how many people value Adam Thielen that highly in fantasy, but he's also with a hamstring injury he suffered on the IR as well. But, the Panthers could be a fun, frisky team for fantasy as well. Deontay Johnson proved himself in that game. Xavier Legette starting to find his sea legs in the NFL. So, who knows for the Panthers? They could be another interesting team. Also, Jonathan Brooks could project to come back soon. So, look out for that team as well offensively. But overall, I think that if you're looking to really get value out of injury, I don't want to sound like, I'm insulting these injured players, because I pray for their speedy recoveries, and it sucks that they're out for these long extended periods of time. But from a fantasy perspective, it's kind of about, now that it is what it is, you have to look at these teams in different manners, where you can't just, say, woe is me. You have to take advantage of what you see in front of you. And like I said, with a team like the Rams, the team like the Niners, it's all going to be about who steps up from this point forward. And while, like I said earlier in the show about Jordan Mason, it's going to be interesting when all these players come back and you can use them as leverage, I still think, all of these players you now know about, you could carry over not just from this season, but to the next season as well. Because now you understand the volatility of certain teams, the vulnerabilities of certain teams. And if you know about them now, chances are in the future, if injuries like this happen again, you'll be better prepared for them, and you'll know these players, be comfortable with starting them in your lineups. So that's just my advice. Let me know what you think in the comments, because it is going to be a very, very volatile market right now in fantasy football. So let me know what you think as the season progresses, as we understand more about these injuries. But that will just about do it for today's show. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I've been Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for your love me comments. Continue using the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features on YouTube to contribute even more to the show, make the show even more interactive than it already is. And I can promise you I will address as many comments as humanly possible from you guys, because I love the interaction, and I love your interaction, most importantly, with the show as well. Consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show as well. But that will just about do it. Come back tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time as we wrap up the week with another great show. But for now, I'm out.